The email came at 8:41 p.m. on November 10th. No subject line, no signature, just a link and 6 words that split my chest open. $50,000 by Friday, or it goes public. I clicked, and that seps when my breath vanished. The video that loaded wasn't real, but it looked real enough to destroy me. My face, my voice, my gestures, all twisted into a scene that never happened. A deep fake, crafted with surgical precision, framing me in something vile. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The clip looped once, twice, then froze on my own digitally counterfeited face. My reflection stared back, smirking like a ghost that had learned how to mimic me. The kitchen was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the oven timer, each sound drilling into me. On the counter, an unpaid invoice sat open. $2,800 due for a consulting gig. I hadn't even billed yet. My laptop pinged again. Same email, same link, same threat. Whoever this was knew exactly where to stick the knife. And then came the thought that nearly broke me. Grace, my daughter, seeing this clip, her believing, even for a second, that her father was that man. The shame burned hotter than any blackmail demand. I barely noticed the smell of smoke curling from the oven until Evan Sipp's voice broke through from the doorway. "Dad, is dinner burning?" His words floated in slow motion. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, hand frozen on the mouse, staring at a digital lie that could erase 20 years of service. My reputation as a federal cybercrime agent turned security consultant, my entire legacy, and in that moment I realized the person who sent this knew me, knew exactly what my reputation meant to me. I yanked the oven door open, smoke billowing out. Evan laughed, shaking his head. "You okay, Dad? You look like you saw a ghost." I lied. I told him I was fine. I told him to go set the table, and as he walked away, I closed the laptop slowly, like it might explode in my hands. On the screen, the countdown had already started. 3 days. Pay up. That night, I barely touched dinner. Grace called to say she was working late with Daniel, her husband, my son-in-law. She sounded distracted, tense, like she'd been crying. I wanted to ask questions, but my throat was locked. After Evan went upstairs, I returned to my laptop. My training kicked in. I checked metadata, server headers, packet trails. This wasn't some random troll. It was professional, calculated. And that's when I saw the smallest, most chilling detail. The file had been compiled on November 9th, between 11:12 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. My own router logs showed a traffic spike during that exact window. Someone inside the circle had access. Someone close. At 52, I thought I'd seen betrayal in every shape: drug lords, hackers, fraudsters. But nothing prepared me for betrayal inside my own family. I poured myself a whiskey, hands shaking. The ice cracked like a gunshot in the glass. Grace had mentioned just last week at Sunday dinner that Daniel had been working late, staying up to take vendor calls. She said it casually, with that patient, forgiving tone only a young wife uses when she's still willing to believe the best in a man. I replayed her words now, and they sliced deeper than the blackmail threat itself. Because if Daniel was behind this, if my son-in-law had turned my own skills against me, then this wasn't just extortion, this was war. I set the whiskey down untouched. My eyes landed on the $2,800 invoice again, the ink still wet from my signature earlier that day. It suddenly felt like a breadcrumb, a reminder that everything I'd worked for was tangible, documented, vulnerable. My ledger had just begun. That night, I slept 2 hours, maybe less. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every vibration of my phone made my pulse spike. At 3:17 a.m., another message came. This time, a short video clip attached. My supposed confession, my voice, my cadence, my phrasing, admitting to crimes I'd never committed. Whoever built this didn't just want money. They wanted to strip me of my name, my honor, and hand my children a father they couldn't respect. And for a brief, ugly moment, I almost considered paying. But then I remembered the one rule I set drilled into Evan since he was old enough to read. Liars always leave receipts. I whispered it into the darkness like a prayer. By dawn, I'd made my decision. This wasn't about $50,000 anymore. It wasn't even about protecting myself. This was about protecting my family from a man they trusted, and about teaching him that you don't blackmail a man who spent his life hunting predators online. I opened a fresh notebook, wrote the date at the top, November 10th, and below it my first entry in what I would come to call the ledger. Invoice $2,800. Threat email received 8:41 p.m. Suspect Daniel Carter. I underlined his name twice. Because deep down, even before the evidence piled up, I already knew my son-in-law had just declared war on me, and I was going to finish it. Sleep was a stranger that night. My body lay still, but my mind kept pacing through shadows. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the deepfake clip playing again. My face warped, my voice confessing to crimes I never committed. Each replay chipped away at the man I thought I was. By 4:20 a.m., I gave up. I brewed coffee in the dark, watching the slow drip fill the pot. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint whir of the heating system kicking on against the November chill. I opened my laptop. The glow lit my face like a mugshot. I dove straight into the router logs. On November 9th, the night before the email arrived, there had been a massive spike in outbound traffic between 11 p.m. and midnight. Thousands of packets transferring out of my network. Not random, not noise. Someone had used my own home's bandwidth to upload or transfer the file. Grace had told me that Daniel was working late that night. Vendor calls, she said. Vendor calls at 11:45 p.m. while my Wi-Fi bled data into the ether. Coincidence? No, not when the stakes were this precise. I took a screenshot of the logs, stamped with the date and time stamp. Evidence wasn't just something you found. It was something you built. By sunrise, the world looked the same, gray sky over Charlotte, wet leaves on the street. But inside, everything had shifted. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the target of my own family. Grace came by around 9 a.m. to drop off a casserole she sipped made. She looked tired, her eyes rimmed red, but she forced a smile. Daniel Sips still asleep. He was up late with work stuff. My throat tightened. Work stuff? Right. I wanted to tell her everything. About the emails, the deepfake, the threat, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had proof that would hold. If I dropped suspicion too early, Daniel could cover his tracks, and then it would be my word against his. Instead, I smiled back. Thanks, Grace. I settle heated up later. She lingered a second, like she wanted to say more, but then just nodded and left. The silence she left behind was heavier than her presence. I called Claire, my attorney. I'd worked cases with her back in my federal days. She picked up on the second ring. Oliver, it's been a while. Too long, I said. My voice cracked more than I wanted it to. I need advice, off the record. She listened as I laid it out. The email, the clip, the deadline. Done, let's break the chain, she warned. Her tone was sharp, the way it always was when she smelled danger. Build the case. Every file, every timestamp, every shred of metadata. If this goes to court, sloppy evidence will bury you. Her words snapped me into focus. This wasn't about reacting, this was about building. That night I sat at the dining room table with a legal pad reconstructing the timeline. November 9th, 11:12 p.m., 12:03 a.m. Router traffic spike. Nov 10, 8:41 p.m. Blackmail email. November 10th, 8:43 p.m. Invoice for $2,800 still on counter. I underlined each entry. This was my foundation. Evan wandered downstairs around midnight, rubbing his eyes. Couldn't net sleep, I said. He eyed the papers spread across the table. Looks like you sit or working a case. I forced a smile. Something like that. He shrugged and grabbed a soda. Before heading back upstairs, he muttered, Don set stay up all night, Dad. You stare not 20 anymore. His words stung, but they grounded me. He was right. I wasn't 20. I was 52 with children depending on me. That meant I couldn't afford to crack. The next morning, I received a second email. Shorter, colder. Clock steps ticking. Midnight Friday, $50,000, or it SEBs everywhere. Attached was a draft press release addressed to local outlets. My name in the subject line, my fabricated confession, quoted like gospel. They were intent bluffing. This was ready to go live. My fingers trembled as I printed it out. Another entry for the ledger. That evening, I sat in the dark of my living room, staring at the reflection in the window. Outside, the streetlights buzzed. Inside, my house felt like a bunker. I thought about Grace, about her marriage, about what would happen if this went public. Would she blame me for ruining her life? Or would she see the truth? And Evan, 17, 1 year from leaving for college, would his friends see the clip and never look at him the same way again? The blackmailer, Daniel, wasn't just trying to ruin me. He was trying to poison the two people who still believed in me. That's when the fear sharpened into something else, resolve. This wasn't a choice between paying or not paying. It was a choice between letting my family drown in lies or teaching the liar that every move leaves a mark. At 11:55 p.m., I opened my notebook again. I wrote in bold letters across the page. November 11th, evidence building begins. Grace Sipps's mention of Daniel working late. Logged, Claire Sipps's directive. Build the case. Blackmail escalation received, press release draft. I closed the book, took a deep breath. Daniel thought I'd fold, thought I'd pay quietly, ashamed to protect my family's harmony. He didn't know me at all. Because I'd spent my whole career teaching criminals one lesson. You can fake a face, but you can fake a trail. And I was going to follow his trail until it buried him. By November 12th, I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. My training as a federal agent gave me instincts, but I needed fresh tools, sharper eyes, and someone I could trust completely. That's when I called Harris. Harris and I had history. Back in my federal days, he was the quiet genius in the corner, the kind of forensic tech who could pull a ghost out of a corrupted hard drive. He was older now, grayer at the temples, but sharper than ever. I wired him $3,500 up front. The kind of retainer that told him this wasn't just another my husband's cheating, check his emails gig. When I laid out the deep fake clip and the blackmail emails, Harris leaned back in his chair and whistled, Oliver, this isn't set an amateur hour. Whoever did this has access to a serious GPU farm and commercial-grade AI tools, not your typical basement hacker. I nodded. I know who it is, I just need proof. Then let me be your eyes, he said. But remember every frame, every artifact, every transfer log. Gotta keep the chain unbroken. Claire's words echoed in my head. Don't break the chain. The ledger grew thicker by the hour. Meanwhile, Leah, my sister, had started digging through financial trails. She was an accountant, meticulous to the bone. I asked her to look at Daniel's records discreetly. 2 nights later, she called me, voice tight with alarm. Oliver, something Seps off. Daniel Seps' accounts show erratic spending, but more than that, there's Seps a balloon loan, $699,842, due December 21st. The number hit me like a sledgehammer, nearly 700 grand hanging over his head like a noose. Suddenly the pieces clicked. Daniel didn't want 50,000 for fun. He was desperate, scrambling to plug a hole that was already swallowing him whole. I wrote it down in the ledger. Leah, $699,842 balloon debt. Motive desperation. Grace unknowingly kept feeding me puzzle pieces too. Over lunch she mentioned Daniel's late-night calls. He set's been on edge, she said, pushing her salad around the plate. Snaps at me for nothing. I hear him on the phone sometimes, yelling at some vendor. I thought it was just stress. My chest tightened. I forced a neutral expression. Did you catch any names? She shook her head. No, but he kept saying send headline, seddos, and thur. Deadline transfer. Words that to her sounded like business. To me they sounded like blackmail. Back home, I rekeyed the locks on my office. November 12th, 6:45 p.m. I logged the change. If Daniel had slipped in before, it wouldn't happen again. I moved all sensitive files, case records, financial ledgers, even Evan's college applications, into a locked storage bin in the basement. Logged that too. November 16th, 2:20 p.m. Paranoia? Maybe. But paranoia had kept me alive on the job. That night, Evan wandered into the basement while I was stacking folders. "Why the sudden spring cleaning?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "Just getting organized," I said. He smirked. "You only get this organized when you start hunting someone." I froze. He was right. He'd grown up watching me work cases. He knew the look in my eyes. I forced a smile. Old habits die hard. But inside, I knew this wasn't just old habit. This was survival. On November 14th, Harris called with his first report. "I've run the video through my filters," he said. "There are micro-artifacts in the facial render, tiny inconsistencies in lip movement. Definitely AI generated. Whoever built it used top-tier software, but they slipped." He emailed me a still frame with highlighted distortion around the jawline. Proof. The first real crack in Daniel Sipp's armor. I printed it out and slid it into the ledger binder. But while evidence stacked, family life crumbled. Grace grew quieter, her texts shorter. Daniel acted like everything was normal, but the tension at Sunday dinner was unbearable. He chewed too fast, spoke too loud, laughed at things that weren't funny. And when I mentioned casually, AI scams are getting wild these days, people fabricating voices and faces, his fork clinked against the plate. His eyes flicked up just for a second before he forced a laugh. Grace noticed. She didn't say anything then, but I caught the question lingering in her eyes. Later, as she hugged me goodbye, she whispered, "Dad, is something going on?" I hugged her tighter. "Not yet, but if there is, SIL handle it." It was the only promise I could make without betraying the case. By the end of that week, my binder was thicker. Router logs, financial notes from Leah, Harris, still frames. Copies of the threatening emails. Each page was another nail in Daniel Sipp's coffin. But evidence doesn't stop the ache of betrayal. At night, lying awake in the dark, I kept replaying one thought. How had I missed it? How had I welcomed a snake into my family? Let him marry my daughter, sit at my table, hold my trust. And now he was holding a knife to my throat, through a screen. I wrote in the ledger that night, November 15th, locks rekeyed. Files moved. Harris confirms synthetic artifacts. Leah confirms $699,842 balloon debt. Grace reports late-night vendor calls. Daniel flinched at AI scam remark. Suspect tightening noose. I stared at the page until my eyes blurred. Daniel thought he was the predator, thought he'd outsmarted me. But he forgot the one rule I lived by: predators leave trails. And I was following his step by step, until it led him straight into the light. Wednesday, November 13th, started with rain on the windows and ended with ink on paper. I spent the morning turning fear into forms. By 9:10 a.m., I was standing under the fluorescent lights of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg station with a harassment blackmail report in my hand. I didn't bring drama. I brought documents, printed screenshots of the threat emails, a USB with a deepfake clip, and a one-page summary of my timeline. The desk sergeant glanced at the binder I carried, gray, heavy, tabbed like a weapon. "Name?" she asked. "Oliver Carter. Charlotte, North Carolina." I placed the binder down, opened to my index. Nov 9, router spike 11:12 p.m., 12:03 a.m. Nov 10, threat 8:41 p.m., follow-up 3:17 a.m. Nov once, escalation press draft. I didn't set say Ibel, a former federal agent. I didn't set need to. The order in my pages said it for me. She stamped the intake. We set logged the report. If you get more messages, forward everything to this case number. I underlined the case number in the ledger and wrote the date, November 13th. Evidence doesn't make you feel safe, but it does make you feel steady. Back home, Harris called. "You near your laptop?" I asked. "I'm here." He'd spent the night dissecting the deep fake frame by frame. "We've got more than micro artifacts now," he said. "Listen," he played a slowed-down segment, my counterfeit jaw tracking one beat behind the phonemes. "That offset 43 milliseconds doesn't happen in natural speech capture. It's a render pipeline hiccup. Also, the sclera reflection on the left eye repeats every 32 frames. Classic synthetic loop. I wrote it exactly as he said, the numbers anchoring my fury. 43 ms offset. 32 frame repeat. Harris sent a short PDF, 4 pages, stills circled in red. His signature at the bottom with November 13th, 10:26 a.m. The first formal slice of proof. Chain sips clean? I asked. Check some on the original file. Hash on the PDF. I logged my workstation in time. I said I'll keep going. Good, I said, because I set him about to pick up a trail. The second threat email had included a new detail I'd ignored in the panic, a line that read, use reference invoice QCM 1184 when you wire. In the footer, a callback number, burner or not, it was a doorway. At 11:02 a.m., I set my phone on the dining table, the little inline recorder cable snapping into the jack. I'd already confirmed I could lawfully record my own call. I opened the ledger and wrote the time in the margin. The house around me was quiet, just the tick of the kitchen clock and the patter of rain smoothing my nerves. I dialed. One ring, two. A man answered. QC Media, Post and Compositing. Not a personal name. A business identity. He'd handed me the banner himself. Hi, I said, keeping my voice flat using a nondescript tone I had used 100 times on undercover calls. Suften following up on invoice QCM 1184, the rush deliverable you promised by end of week. Our vendor needs confirmation your workstation rendered the final. A beat. Keyboard clatter. Yeah, I see the ticket. We sitter on track. Who sips this for again? Same client as yesterday, I said. The Charlotte upload. Another beat. I heard the clink of a cup on a desk. He lowered his voice. Is this Daniel? I let the silence do the talking. People fill silence with truth. He hurried on. Look, we can set move any more without the second half of the $27,400. The GPU rental alone cost us. I hung up. I didn't need more. I had a name, QC Media, on my recording tied to QCM 1184, and a casual admission about $27,400. Numbers that would soon matter. I labeled the audio file, wrote the length, 213, and slid a fresh tab into the binder, QC Media, call 11:02 a.m. I stared at the word media on the tab until it blurred. Daniel hadn't commissioned a backyard scam, he'd hired production. The rain thickened, drumming a steady rhythm. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, the house smelling like wet leaves and grounds. The weight of what I'd just caught hit me in waves. My son-in-law had put my face on a professional workstation and printed a lie he planned to mail to the people I protected. He thought new hardware could erase old truths. At 12:41 p.m. Grace texted, "Are you home for dinner?" Daniel said he might be late again. I typed, "Yeah, come by if you want." My hand hovered, then I added, "Drive safe." It felt like placing a hand over a crack in the wall. I forwarded the call recording to Harris and to Claire with a single line, one-party call, identity and invoice captured. Claire called right back. "Oliver, that Den2C Media set statement is gold. Don't stit call again. We don't stit want them spooked before subpoenas land. Save everything and document the recording date, time, and device." "Already in the ledger," I said. She exhaled. "Good. I self-prep a harassment addendum with the new material. Keep building." Afternoon dropped into dusk. The rain stopped, the streets steamed. I drove to Leah's after dinner, binder seat-belted beside me. Her front porch smelled like damp pine and pencil shavings. My sister's house had always smelled like homework. She had files spread across her dining table. I pulled what I could from public records and apps. Grace added me to when they needed mortgage help, she said. Daniel Sip's debt picture is worse than I thought. She pointed to a spreadsheet. Balloon note $699,842. Due December 21st glared in red. Below it missed vendor payments, 2 credit cards near max, and a transfer schedule that read like a panic diary. "He sits patching a sinking boat," Leah said quietly. "If he doesn't sits plug that by Christmas, He sits either renegotiating or drowning. I wrote the date. Nov 13, 7:35 p.m. and the deadline in the ledger again, underlining December 21st. The number felt like a fuse. You don't have to see the explosion to know the match is lit. Do you want me to tell Grace? Leah asked. Not yet, I said. Let me carry it a little longer. If we tell her without proof, he'll bury the tracks. And then I lose the only thing that wins this, a clean trail. Leah nodded, sad and steady. You always were the one who could sit with the hard thing. Driving home through puddles, I replayed the call in my head. Each word a nail. QC Media. QCM 1184. $27,400. They weren't just details, they were coordinates. Back at the kitchen table, I expanded the day SIPS entry. Der Diger Nov 13. CMPD harassment slackmail report filed. Case hash logged. USB of clip submitted for reference. Harris preliminary PDF 43 ms phone name offset 32 frame sclera reflection loop hashes recorded timestamp 10:26 a.m. Cold call 11:02 a.m. QC Media post and compositing. Recording length 2:13 captured invoice ref QCM 1184. Mention of $27,400 balance. Charlotte upload reference. Leah reconfirms $699,842 balloon note. December 21st due. Additional delinquency flags. Claire, no more calls. Preserve, prep subpoenas. I capped my pen. The house creaked as the heat kicked on. Somewhere upstairs, Evan shifted in his sleep, the sound a small mercy. Daniel thought he had me pinned between shame and the clock. He thought he could herd me toward a quiet payment and a lifetime of silence. But all he's done is sharpen me. Because paper cuts add up when you drag them across a lie. And every phone call is a thread. If you're patient enough to pull, tomorrow I'd start tugging on the money. Wires don't lie. And if QC Media got paid, there'd be a banker, a trail, and a signature that belonged to the man who married my daughter. I closed the ledger and laid my hand on the cover like a vow. You can mimic my face, you can counterfeit my voice, but you can't forge my patience, and patience is what buries men who think they're smarter than proof. Thursday morning, November 14th, began with sunlight cutting sharp lines through my blinds. It was one of those deceptive Carolina mornings, crisp, bright, calm, but inside me the storm only grew. I sat at my desk, binder open, Harris's PDF on one side, Leah's spreadsheet on the other. The next move was money. In my career, I'd learned one lesson that always proved true: people lie, but money doesn't. Every dollar leaves a shadow. At 8:47 a.m., Harris called again. His voice was steady, matter of fact. Oliver, I said, finished the forensic sweep of the video and your router logs. Cross-referencing the hash stamps, I can now certify the deepfake was rendered externally, then uploaded from your home network. Which means someone inside used my Wi-Fi. Exactly. I written a full report, 6 pages. File name Taya Carter _deepfake_report_1.pdf. Signed, dated, hashed. I exhaled. Send it. Seconds later, the PDF landed in my inbox. I opened it, my eyes scanning Harris' instant precise language, the artifact confirmation, 43 ms latency. 32 frame loop, rendering likely conducted by QC Media Workstation. Upload confirmed via Carter Residence Router November 9th, 2312, 003. The final line chilled me. Such a conclusion, deep fake, non-authentic. Intent to defraud. I printed it, slipped it into the binder behind a fresh tab. Forensic report, November 14th. Meanwhile, Leah texted. I dug deeper. Found something, call me. I rang her back. She didn't waste time. Oliver, I traced Daniel Sepp's transfers. He wired $27,400 to QC Media on October 28th. I found the note on his account ledger. That Sepp's the down payment. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the desk. She continued. If that was the first half, there's Sepp's probably a second transfer pending. He sips paying them in stages. He sips bought himself a digital firing squad. I wrote it in block letters in the ledger, $27,400. QC Media, October 28th, initial wire. Motive, means, method. It was all coming together. At 11:30 a.m., I met Ortiz at the bank, an old colleague turned compliance officer. He was the kind of man who lived in the gray between numbers and morality. We ordered coffee in the lobby cafe. "You didn't set here this from me," Ortiz said, stirring sugar he wouldn't set drink. "But if you subpoena QC Media SEPs accounts, you said'll find they SEP been fattened by recent wires. Not just from Daniel either. They run dirty jobs for desperate clients." "Will you testify if it comes to that?" I asked. He gave a thin smile. "If compelled, I still tell the truth. Until then, I shall just say, every shadow leaves a banker." I logged the meeting. November 14th, 11:30 a.m. Ortiz confirms QC Media Wire's subpoena could confirm more. That afternoon, Evan came home early from school, backpack slung over one shoulder. He found me at the dining table, binder spread open like a map. "What SEPs all this?" he asked. "Work," I said, closing the folder halfway. He tilted his head. "You start building a case, aren't set you." I hesitated. He was 17, old enough to read tension, old enough to feel the silence around Grace and Daniel. "Dad," he said softly, "you always told me, liars leave receipts. Is that what this is? Receipts?" I froze. His words cut deeper than he knew. My son had just repeated the line I'd whispered into the dark 3 nights ago. I nodded slowly. "Yes, that sifts exactly what this is." He didn't press further, he just dropped his backpack. Patted my shoulder once, a small gesture, but it steadied me more than coffee or whiskey ever could. I wrote his line into the ledger, underlined twice, because sometimes evidence isn't just documents. Sometimes it's the echo of your own teaching coming back when you need it most. That night, I spread everything across the table. Harassment report filed. Nov 13. Harristet forensic report, November 14th. Cold call recording, QC Media. Leah's discovery, $699 and 842 balloon debt due debt 21. Confirmed wire. $27,400 to QC Media, October 28th. Ortiz's hint. Subpoenas will uncover full money trail. Each page was a blade. Each date a cut. Daniel had thought $50,000 would silence me. Instead, he'd handed me every nail for his coffin. Grace called around 9:15 p.m. "Dad, are you okay? You've been distant." Her voice was fragile, a thread stretched too tight. "I'm okay." I lied. "Just work." "Daniel Sep's stressed," she whispered. "I don't Seps know what Sep's going on. He Sep's making late-night calls, slamming doors. I barely recognize him." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her everything, to free her from the storm she didn't know she was standing in. But the ledger wasn't ready. The proof had to be airtight. "Hang on, Grace," I said. "Just hang on." When she hung up, I sat in the silence of the kitchen, staring at the binder. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about showing my daughter that truth, when documented and relentless, can burn through even the darkest lie. Before bed, I logged the day. LED Gear, November 14th. Harrisip forensic report finalized. Signed, Leah confirms $27,400 wire to QC Media, October 28th. Ortiz indicates subpoena path. Evan, liars leave receipts. Grace reports Daniel volatile, stressed. I closed the book. Daniel thought he was hunting me, but all he'd done was feed me his receipts, dollar by dollar. And now I had the one thing he couldn't deepfake, a trail of money that whispered his name. Thanksgiving, November 23rd. The day families come together, pretending every fracture can be smoothed with turkey and gravy. But for us, the table was already split down the middle. Grace and Daniel arrived late. Grace carried a pie she'd baked, her eyes tired but hopeful. Daniel followed with that forced smile I'd learned to read, the kind of grin men wear when their debts are clawing at their throat. Evan set the table, counting plates. "We're missing two," he said. Leia and Ortiz had begged off, claiming other commitments. Truth was, they knew tension would be thick enough to choke on. Empty chairs have weight. They remind you of the witnesses who could have been there. Dinner began the way all strained dinners do. Too many polite silences, too many clinks of forks against china. Grace tried to fill the void with chatter about work. Evan mumbled about school. Daniel dominated the air, talking too loud about big projects and vendor partnerships. Every word felt like camouflage. I watched him carefully, my ledger playing in my head. $27,400 wired. Balloon note $699,842. QC media call invoice QCM 1184. Forensic report signed November 14th. All of it sat in my binder at home. Here it lived behind my eyes. I waited until the room was calm. Conversation low. Then I said casually, "Funny thing I read in the paper last week. Some guy in Raleigh got busted paying 30 grand for a deepfake scam. AI can make anyone say anything these days." The fork slipped from Daniel Sip's hand. It clinked against the plate like a dropped bullet casing. For a second his face went pale. Then he forced a laugh. "Crazy world, huh?" Grace Sips's eyes flicked to him, sharp, questioning. The silence that followed was thick. Even Evan noticed, glancing from me to Daniel like he'd just stumbled onto a chessboard mid-match. After dinner, Grace lingered in the kitchen while Daniel pretended to check football scores in the living room. She washed dishes slowly, her voice low. "Dad," she whispered, "what was that about? You said it like a test." I dried a plate. Careful with my words. Sometimes people underestimate how dangerous lies can get. She looked at me, searching. "Are you talking about Daniel?" My throat burned. I wanted to tell her, wanted to hand her the binder and let the proof speak. But it wasn't ready. The chain had to stay unbroken, airtight, undeniable. Instead, I touched her arm gently. "When the truth is ready, you still know. Until then, just watch. Listen." Her eyes watered, but she nodded. "I trust you." It was both a gift and a knife, because if she trusted me and I failed, she'd never forgive me. That night, after they left, I opened the binder again. I added the entry. November 23rd, Thanksgiving. Dinner at 6:15 p.m. Daniel dropped fork at mention of deep fake scam. Grace noticed, private kitchen talk. That, "I trust you." Set. Evidence isn't just numbers. Sometimes it's the way a fork betrays a man. 3 days later, Harris delivered another package, a padded envelope, hand-delivered. Inside were 2 external drives he'd cloned from a QC media workstation. "Anonymous tip," he said, but we both knew he'd leaned on old channels to get them. "Keep them sealed until Claire says go," Harris warned. "Chain of custody is everything." I logged it. November 26th, 4:42 p.m. drives received, sealed. The binder grew heavier. But weight isn't just paper. It's silence at the dinner table. It's the empty chairs of Leah and Ortiz. The way Grace's eyes flicked when Daniel flinched. The way Evan studied me like he was trying to decode the silence. The closer I got to the truth, the further my family slipped away. At night, I stared at the ceiling, hearing Grace's whisper, "I trust you." And I repeated back in the dark, "Don't fail her. Don't fail her." By the end of November, the ledger entries looked like battle reports. Harassment report filed November 13th. Forensic report finalized November 14th. Wire transfer confirmed. Ortiz hints subpoena path. Grace Sep's suspicion growing. QC media drive sealed November 26th. Every detail locked into place. Every shadow accounted for. Daniel thought he was playing poker with a man too old to keep up. But what he didn't realize was this. I wasn't playing poker. I was building a courtroom. And when the gavel fell, he wouldn't just lose his hand. He'd lose everything. December 19th arrived cold and glassy. The kind of Charlotte morning where your breath feels like a confession. I parked a block from the Mecklenburg County Courthouse and sat for a full minute with my hands on the wheel, feeling the pulse in my fingers. My binder rode shotgun, heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. It wasn't rage inside those tabs. It was proof. Claire met me on the steps. Coat cinched, hair pinned like a battle helm. You ready, Oliver? I've been ready since 8:41 p.m. November 10th, I said. She nodded once. Stay first person in your head, but let the paper talk. We set her asking for a temporary restraining order, expedited preservation, and forensic imaging. Judge R. Morales. Fair, exacting, good on chain of custody. Inside, the courtroom looked like all the others I'd known. Oak pews, a seal that promised order, a clock that dared you to waste its time. Harris sat 2 rows back with a slim briefcase, Leah beside him with her spreadsheets. Evan slid in quietly near the aisle, jaw set, and then Grace entered. Alone at first, clutching her purse like it might keep her heart from falling out. She saw me and tried to smile. Daniel came last, clean shave, dark suit, eyes restless. He took the far side, 2 seats down from Grace, as if distance could pretend a marriage wasn't burning. Calling Carter versus Carter, preliminary relief, the clerk said. The gavel's rap sounded like the lid closing on a box you never open again. Claire rose. Your Honor, petitioner Oliver Carter seeks immediate relief in response to ongoing extortion utilizing synthetic media, deepfake imagery, disseminated with threats to publish, unless a payment of $50,000 is made by a stated deadline. We will show motive, means, and method tied to respondent Daniel Carter. Daniel Sepp's attorney wasn't Sepp's there. He Sepp's chosen arrogance over counsel. He spoke for himself. Your Honor, I have no idea what my father-in-law is alleging, but it isn't Sepp's true. Morales peered over her glasses. We shall see. Claire began with the spine. Petitioner sifts Exhibit 1, the ledger index. She handed up a 4-page index of my tabs, dates, descriptions, chain references. This is the table of contents to the binder. Each entry is independently supported by exhibits with timestamps and hashes. I felt my breath steady. First page, first nail. Exhibit 2, Claire said. Prints of the extortion emails received on November 10th and November 11th. Threat language includes set of $50,000 by Friday, or it goes public. Set of and a second escalation with a draft press release, naming local outlets. The judge read, expression unreadable, noted. Exhibit 3. Router log excerpts for November 9th, 11:12 p.m. to 12:03 a.m. annotated. Packet spike consistent with the upload of the final synthetic file from petitioner Sepp's home network. Authentication, Judge Morales asked. Harris stood. Your Honor, I authenticated the logs by obtaining the router Sepp's system time, boot record, and DHCP lease tables. I hashed the exported files at acquisition, and again today, no deviation. Exhibit 4, Claire continued, Harris's forensic report, quote, Carter underscore deepfake underscore report underscore 1.pdf, comma. Quote, dated November 14th with hash values, confirming micro-artifacts, a 43 millisecond phone name offset, and a 32 frame loop in scleral reflection, inconsistent with natural capture. Conclusion, non-authentic synthetic origin. Harris approached, swore in, and spoke like a surgeon. The offset demonstrates a render pipeline lag. The repeated sclera reflection proves a looped lighting artifact common in GAN-based face composites. Judge Morales glanced at Daniel. Do you dispute the technical findings? Daniel Sepp's jaw flexed. I dispute the accusation that I had anything to do with any video. We'll get there, Claire said smoothly. Exhibit 5, call recording from November 13th at 11:02 a.m., lawfully captured. The called party answers, QC Media, Post and Compositing. During the call, the representative references invoice QCM 1184, a Charlotte upload, and states they cannot proceed without the second half of $27,400. The audio has been authenticated. We've provided the capture device make and model and a chain log. She pressed play. The courtroom filled with a stranger Sipps's careless voice. QC Media, Post and Compositing. Yeah, QCM 1184. We can set move without the second half of the 27.4. The GPU rental alone cost us. Claire stopped the playback. Silence landed like a weight. Exhibit 6, Bank Trail, preliminary, she said. and Leah Rose swore, then approached with a neat packet. Accountant Leah Carter, for the record. I am petitioner's sister. Using records I had lawful access to during prior family financial assistance and publicly accessible entries, I identified a $27,400 wire from respondent Daniel Carter to QC Media on October 28th. I also discovered a balloon note in respondent's name for $699,842, due December 21st. In my opinion as an accountant, respondent is under acute financial distress. The judge examined the page with the red circled number. Mr. Carter, did you wire $27,400 to an entity named QC Media? Daniel swallowed. I invest in production sometimes. That doesn't mean, do you deny the wire? Morales pressed. He flicked his eyes toward Grace. I don't recall the exact answer. The yes set, or setted or setted.
He clenched.
No, I don't deny the wire. Claire didn't gloat. She turned a page. Exhibit 7, CMPD harassment report filed November 13th. Case number logged. Exhibit 8, drives received November 26th. Sealed and preserved, believed to be cloned from a QC Media workstation. We're not moving to open them today. We're requesting court-ordered forensic imaging by a neutral examiner. Exhibit 9, affidavit from Mr. Ortiz, compliance officer, attesting that a subpoena would reveal recent inbound wires to QC Media consistent with the amounts referenced on the recording. Ortiz stood in the gallery, raised a hand. If compelled, I will testify to the truth of banking records I lawfully maintain. Claire closed the loop. We're asking for a temporary restraining order barring any publication or dissemination of synthetic media purporting to depict petitioner. An order compelling respondent to surrender his laptop and associated devices for imaging within 24 hours, preservation subpoenas to QC Media and associated payment processors, and referral of the extortion allegations to the district attorney. The judge folded her hands. Mr. Carter, do you wish to respond? Daniel stood, palms out, performing for a life he was losing. Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding. My father-in-law has always been controlling. This the deep fake sept nonsense. Maybe he made it himself to trap me. He hates me. He sept's trying to break up my marriage. Claire didn't rise to it. She simply said, Play 10 seconds, Your Honor, and tapped Harris's laptop. The court speaker let out my counterfeit voice, its syllables tripping the 43-millisecond lag, before she paused it on the frozen smirk of the fake me. I stood and faced the image, not the man. I spent 20 years hunting people who hid behind screens. I said, voice steady. I know the difference between a mistake and malice. My daughter and my son deserve better than a man who rents lies and bills them to our family. For a moment, nobody moved. The air felt like the second before a glass shatters. Grace Sipp's chair scraped the floor. She stood trembling. Daniel. Her voice was a thread that cut. Did you do this? He didn't answer. His silence was an answer. She turned to Judge Morales. To Claire, to me. I believe my dad. My knees went weak with a kind of grief I didn't know, had a name, relief that bleeds. Evan put a hand on my shoulder. The small weight steadied me like faith. Judge Morales spoke without theatrics. The motion is granted. Temporary restraining order. Any publication or transfer of media purporting to depict petitioner is barred. Respondent will surrender his laptop, external drives, and phone for forensic imaging by a neutral examiner by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Subpoenas to QC Media and relevant processors are authorized. The district attorney will receive a referral packet from this record. Further, respondent is admonished. Any attempt to destroy evidence will be considered contempt. Daniel sputtered. You can take my... The judge Heps's look cut him clean. I can, and I just did. Sit down. Claire sat, exhaled. Harris scribbled a time on the edge of his notes. 10:42 a.m. Leah pressed her lips together to keep from crying. I wrote the orders as the judge spoke them, the way I'd written every detail since November 10th, because I wanted the act to end the way it began, with ink. Outside, on the steps, Grace came to me with a face of shards. How long did you know? Long enough to hate that I knew, I said. Not long enough to fail you. Evan looked past us to Daniel standing alone at the curb, phone in hand, already calculating. He whispered the line he had given me days earlier, a benediction that felt like a verdict. Dad, you always said liars leave receipts. I laid my palm on the binder. They do, and today the receipts spoke. In the gray noon, sirens wailed somewhere far off, a sound unconnected to us and yet perfectly timed. Claire handed me a copy of the signed order. We SIL move fast, she said. Imaging, subpoenas, DA. The rest is gravity. I nodded. Gravity is enough. Grace Sepp's fingers found mine. A daughter who Sepps had to choose and had chosen the terrible truth over the comforting lie. Is Sepps coming home with you? She whispered. Just for today. As long as you need, I told her. We walked to the car as the courthouse doors swung behind us. Daniel didn't follow. He stared at the paper in his hand like it might morph into mercy if he willed it hard enough. It wouldn't die. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply clicks, like a gavel, like a lock, a sound small enough to miss unless you've been waiting months to hear it. Back in the driver's seat, I wrote one final line under today's SIP's date. December 19th, Turo granted. Imaging ordered. Subpoenas authorized. De referral, Grace chose truth. And then I closed the ledger, because for the first time since November 10th, the day did not belong to fear. It belonged to the trail we had followed into the light. December 20th felt like the quiet after a tornado. The sky too blue for what had just happened. My phone buzzed at 9:14 a.m. with a subject line that looked like the end of a story and the start of a sentence. Temporary suspension pending investigation. Daniel's employer, Crescent Ridge Creative, sent it to his company address with HR copied. I read the first two lines standing at my kitchen counter. Coffee going cold in my hand. Effective immediately, you are placed on paid administrative leave. You must surrender all company devices by 5 p.m. and avoid contact with clients while the inquiry proceeds. I slid the email printout into the binder. December 20th, 9:14 a.m. Suspension Notice, CRC HR 2197. Paper doesn't gloat, it just stares back at you with ink and timing. 5 minutes later, a second message hit. This one from Claire. Sheriff served imaging order at 8:52 a.m. Laptop collected. Neutral examiner intake 10:30 a.m. Sealed bag hash NE 4412. Chain intact. I wrote each number carefully, because numbers are the parts of a day that don't argue. The house was too still. The only sound was the soft tick of the wall clock, the distant whir of the heater pushing against December. In that quiet, I realized the strangest thing of all. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired. At 11:06 a.m., Harris texted a photo of a notarized page, QC Media Affidavit, the company letterhead gray and corporate, the content, anything but. We affirm we were contracted by Daniel Carter to produce a synthetic media asset on or about October 25th, November 9th, invoice QCM 1184, first payment $27,400 received October 28th, signed by Quentin Parr, operations lead, notary seal, Mecklenburg Co., North Carolina, 12/20th, 10:41 a.m., 4 pages. Anonymous staffer pushed it across the line. Harris said when he called, "Guilt looks good on some people." I slid the affidavit under a new tab, the sound of cardstock against cardstock clean and final. December 20th, QC Media Affidavit 4 pp, Notary 10:41 a.m., Q Par. By noon, the silence had a shape. Grace arrived without texting first. She walked in holding her keys like a talisman, set them down beside the fruit bowl, and didn't move. "I thought I knew him," she said, voice thin like paper held too close to a flame. I didn't rush her. I just pulled out a chair. She sat, the quiet stretched. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck hissed and coughed away. "You did know him," I said finally. And then he chose something else. Her eyes filled, then spilled. She covered her face with both hands and cried the way people cry when the future they plan meets a wall that doesn't move. I stood at the sink, useless as a lighthouse in daylight, and let her finish. When she could breathe again, I pushed a glass of water across the table. She took it like a lifeline. "What happens now?" she whispered. "Due process," I said. "Devices are being imaged by a neutral examiner today. Subpoenas are out to QC Media and the processors. The DA has the referral. There said'll be interviews, and then there said'll be facts." She nodded, but her face told me facts weren't what hurt, loss was. Evan got home around 3:20 p.m., saw her, and said nothing loud. He just put a hand on her shoulder, a small weight that told the room it was still held together by threads we'd chosen long before this storm. I made dinner because cooking is counting in disguise. Salt, heat, minutes, measures. The math keeps your hands from shaking. Grace ate 3 forkfuls and then set the plate down, staring at a point in the middle distance where the life she'd wanted used to sit. "Can I stay here tonight?" she asked. "As long as you need," I said. That night, the house sounded like an instrument tuned to grief. Doors clicked softly. Water ran in the hall bathroom. The heater exhaled. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling while the day wrote itself into me. At 7:58 a.m. the next morning, December 21, Claire's email arrived. "Bank subpoenas served Ortiz, confirms QC Media inbound wires October, November. Preliminary statement ready when court clears." She attached a 1-page memo with bullet points tidy as cuts. October 28th, $27,400. Daniel QC Media, November 6th, $5,800. Daniel QCM Holdings LLC, pending balance scheduled 12/20. Halted by TRO. I printed it and wrote a small note in the margin I'd never planned to write. Widowmaker line averted, because that second payment would have finished the thing that nearly finished me. By mid-morning, Harris called from the examiner's lab. The neutral tech had processed intake. Chain bag hash NE 4412. Opened 9:32 a.m. DHA 256 recorded. Workstation image initiated 9:54 a.m. Completion ETA January 7th. And I copied every number because numbers don't wobble even when you do. Around lunch, the doorbell rang. A courier stood there with a slim envelope, return address redacted. Sender private. Inside was a single sheet. QC Media internal email. Print subject line Daniel C. delivery window plus GPU hours. And one paragraph that made my skin go cold. Confirm the Charlotte face model was trained on the November 2nd. 7 pulls from his socials and the YouTube panels he sent. He wants the mouth tracked tighter. Adjust for the lag. Dated November 8th, 2:14 p.m. I didn't ask how Harris had encouraged the leak. Some gifts you accept and log. December 21st, internal email, QC Media received by courier, 12:27 p.m. Envelope retained, fingerprints avoided, scanned and sealed. Grace drifted in and out of the kitchen all day, moving like someone wearing a coat that belonged to another life. We didn't talk much. When we did, it was about tiny, safe things. Whether the plant by the window needed repotting, whether Evan's engine light meant anything. The big things sat between us like a closed piano. In the evening, the TV ran without sound. Headlines scrolled and a crawl we didn't set read. The house smelled like detergent and winter air. I opened the binder one more time and added a line that felt like a prayer written as a checklist. LED Jeer Dipsh 2021. CRC suspension email to Daniel 9:14 a.m. 12/20. Sheriff served imaging neutral intake bag hash NE 4412 10:30 a.m. QC Media affidavit 4PP notary 10:41 a.m. QPAR affirms Daniel as client. Invoice QCM $1,184 $27,400 payment 10/28. Claire Banks subpoenas served. Ortiz confirms inbound wires 10/28 11/6. Courier drop QC Media internal email 11/8 2:14 p.m. referencing Charlotte face model mouth track lag adjustment. Next milestone Examiner SEP's report ETA January 7th. I closed the binder and left my palm on the cover. The quiet in the house didn't accuse or absolve. It just existed like a snowfield after footfalls. Grace came to the doorway, hair tied back, eyes raw. I thought I knew him, she said again, softer now, more to herself than to me. You did, I answered. And knowing someone means believing who they are when they finally show you. He chose this. You didn't set. She nodded, and in that nod I felt the floor stop tilting. Not because it was over, it wasn't, but because the center of gravity had shifted back to us. Later, when the lights were off and the street outside had folded into dark, Evan Sepp's voice floated from the hallway. Half asleep, a boy crossing a river toward a man. Night, Dad. Night, Grace. Night, we said together. And for the first time since November 10th, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a sentence with the period in the right place. Brief, honest, earned. Tomorrow would bring interviews and recorded statements, the steady march of forms and signatures. January 7th waited like a date circled in red. But tonight the quiet spoke louder than any threat Daniel had sent. Because men like him count on chaos. And when you refuse to shout, when you let the paper and the calendar carry the weight, you teach a liar the sound that breaks them most. Nothing at all. January 7th. The date circled in red on my calendar. The examiner's report. The day the numbers would either hold or collapse. I drove to the lab on South Tryon with the binder in the passenger seat, buckled like a child. The winter sun hung low, pale and unforgiving, the air so sharp it felt like paper slicing my lungs. Claire met me at the entrance. It's ready, she said, handing me a sealed envelope. Exhibit Forensic Imaging Report. Daniel Carter laptop. We sat in a small conference room, the kind that smells of toner and stale coffee, and broke the seal together. The examiner's signature stamped the first page, bag hash NE 4412, open 9:32 a.m., December 20th, CHA 256 recorded. Workstation image verified. Analysis completed January 7th, 11:14 a.m. The findings read like a confession. Daniel never spoke. Deepfake project files. Directory/users/DC Arter/projects/faceforge/Charlotte_model/ training data folder labeled Nov27_social_polls, screen captures of my LinkedIn panels, YouTube interviews, Facebook photos, audio alignment logs showing phoneme tracks, adjusted for the very same 43 ms offset Harris identified. Invoices and email strings referencing QC Media. File name QCM-1184_final.mp4. Payment tracker spreadsheet with an entry. 10/28 wire $27,400 half. 11/6 wire $5,800 GPU hours. 12/20 pending $16,800 halted. It wasn't just evidence. It was Daniel's handprint in wet cement. I wrote the findings line by line into the ledger, each word a nail. January 7th. Examiner confirms deepfake project, training data, alignment logs, payment tracker, bag hash NE 4412 chain intact. At 2 p.m. We reconvened in Judge Morales' courtroom. Daniel sat slumped, a man shrinking inside his own suit. His eyes darted to Grace, who wouldn't look back. Evan sat behind me, hands folded, steady as stone. Claire rose. Your Honor, the neutral examiner's report confirms beyond doubt that respondent Daniel Carter maintained deep-fake projects, training data, and payment trackers on his personal laptop. Chain of custody is unbroken. Payments match prior testimony from Ortiz and records from QC Media. Ortiz took the stand, calm as ever. He confirmed the wires, $27,400. On October 28th, $5,800 on November 6th. He explained the halted balance of $16,800, frozen after the restraining order. The pattern is consistent with staged payments to a vendor, Ortiz said. In my opinion, it sets unmistakably a contract for services rendered. Daniel tried to speak, but the judge cut him short. Save it. We. The DA's representative entered a motion to pursue extortion charges. Claire filed the civil complaint for damages and injunctive relief. The room felt like it was closing in on Daniel, each paper, each tab, each exhibit folding around him like walls. And then Leah took the stand. She held up the spreadsheet printout with the balloon debt, $699,842, due December 21st. Your Honor, this debt explains respondent's motive, she said. Desperation drives reckless choices. He needed cash fast, and he chose extortion. Grace bowed her head, tears on her cheeks. Evan leaned toward me, whispering so only I could hear, Dad, accepts proof made flesh. I nodded. Yes, flesh and paper. The Judge Sepp's ruling was steady, unhurried, based on the evidence presented: emails, router logs, forensic reports, wire transfers, affidavits. I find that respondent Daniel Carter engaged in acts consistent with extortion through the creation and threatened dissemination of synthetic media. Injunctive relief is granted in full. The civil complaint is accepted. Criminal referral is sustained. All devices are to remain in custody of the examiner until trial. Respondent is barred from contacting petitioner or his immediate family pending further order. Her gavel struck at 3:42 p.m. The sound wasn't set loud, but to me it was thunder. Grace wept quietly in the gallery. Evan placed a steady hand on her shoulder, the boy becoming the anchor. Daniel slumped forward, eyes hollow, as deputies guided him out to complete paperwork. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of pages being lifted, one tab at a time, from my back. That night, back home, I wrote the closing lines for the day. LADGIR, January 7th. Examiner's report confirms deepfake projects, training data, audio logs, payment tracker. Ortiz testifies wires confirmed $27,400, $5,800. Belia testifies balloon debt, $699,842, due dates 21. Day referral sustained. Civil complaint filed. Injunction granted, Daniel barred from contact. Judge Morales ruling 3:42 p.m. And beneath it, one line that felt less like record and more like scripture. Proof becomes judgment when written in both ink and blood. I closed the ledger, hand resting on the cover. For weeks it had been a shield. Now it was something else. A verdict? Because Daniel had believed lies could outpace paper. But paper, when patient, always wins. In the weeks after the ruling, the house felt different. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner. Like a wound that had been washed, still raw but free of infection. The binder no longer lived on my kitchen table. It sat on a shelf in my office, thick and complete. Every tab a scar turned into evidence. At 52, I realized something I hadn't known when this began. Revenge isn't fire. Fire burns quick and leaves ash. What I had built wasn't a blaze, it was documentation. Patient, precise, heavy as stone. Grace came over more often, her marriage dissolving in silence. Papers had been filed, separation, preliminary custody discussions for a future she hadn't wanted to imagine. She sat across from me at the table one evening, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't drink. I keep thinking back, she said. All the nights he said he was working late, the anger, the calls I pretended not to hear. I feel stupid. You, stir not stupid, I told her. You were in love. Love believes first, that isn't sept weakness. That's sept's trust. She looked at me, eyes wet. And you never trusted him? I did, I admitted. Enough to welcome him into my family. Enough to hand him my daughter Sips's hand. But trust doesn't mean blindness. When the truth came, I had to follow it. Her shoulders shook once. Then she nodded. I am glad you did. Evan was quieter through it all, but his quiet carried weight. He worked late on college essays at the kitchen counter, headphones in, occasionally glancing at the binder on the shelf like it was a relic of some war he'd grown up beside. One night he pulled his earbuds out and asked, "Do you think people ever learn, Dad, or do they just hide better?" I thought about Daniel, about the balloon note, the wires, the affidavit with his name. People learn when they such forced to. Hiding only lasts until the paper finds them. He nodded slowly, writing that line into whatever notebook he was filling for school. I smiled faintly. Maybe one day those words would keep him steady the way they kept me. Claire called mid-January. The DA SEP's office is moving forward. Likely indictment within the quarter. Civil case stays scheduled. I thanked her, though what I felt wasn't gratitude so much as gravity, the weight of justice not done, but rolling, inevitable. Leah visited a few days later with fresh spreadsheets, because that was how she loved with numbers. She showed me the official docket entries, the preliminary restraining order logged into the system. I added them to the binder. Every time I slid in another document, I remembered paper is what survives men. One night, long after the house was asleep, I pulled the binder down again. I turned to the first page, November 10th. Threat email, 8:41 p.m., $2,800 invoice on counter. Suspect, Daniel Carter. I traced the ink with my finger, remembering how my hand had trembled when I wrote it. Now the line looked steady, as if it had always been there. I flipped through page after page, router logs, call transcripts, affidavits, invoices, subpoenas, the examiner's report, proof of a man's betrayal, preserved like fossils. And in the margin of one page, Evan's words, "Liars always leave receipts." That was the line that had carried me. That was the legacy. I realized then that revenge hadn't left me angry. It had left me documented. My name wasn't cleared by fire or fury. It was cleared by ink, by timestamps, by the patience to let lies hang themselves with their own paper trails. Grace was healing. Evan respected me more. Leah slept easier knowing the numbers balanced again. Even Harris, in his quiet way, said, "This one set'll make a hell of a case study." And me? I looked at the binder and felt something close to peace. Because what papers leave behind isn't rage. It's record, and records survive lies. That night I wrote one final line under Act 10 in the ledger. At 52, I said learn revenge isn't stut fire. It's such documentation. Fires fade. Paper endures. I closed the binder gently, slid it back onto the shelf, and turned off the light. For the first time since November, I slept without waking. The first week of February carried a brittle chill, the kind that makes Charlotte mornings taste like metal. On February 3rd at 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from Claire, resignation tendered. Daniel had walked into Crescent Ridge Creative the day before with a typed letter folded twice. HR scanned it, stamped it, logged it. One page, 4 sentences. Effective immediately, I resign my position. I will not contest my administrative suspension. Thank you for the opportunities provided. No signature flourish, no apology, just a retreat disguised as courtesy. I printed it and slid it into the binder. Exhibit Resignation Letter, February 2nd, 4:43 p.m. CRC intake stamp. Another receipt. Another shadow. Grace came over that evening with a manila envelope in her purse. She placed it on the table like it weighed 50 pounds. Inside were her separation papers, signed, notarized, filed. "I didn't too want to bring this here," she whispered, but it felt like it belonged in the same house as the ledger. I looked at the signature line where her name sat, bold and final. My throat tightened, but not from anger. From grief for what she'd lost, and pride for what she'd chosen. "You are free now," I said. She shook her head. "Not yet." But I kept them walking there. We sat in silence. The papers between us. Evan came in from school, glanced at the envelope, and without asking put a hand on Grace's shoulder. The same hand he'd placed on mine weeks earlier in court. My children were steadying each other, a balance I hadn't expected but would always be grateful for. The next day, I drove to Evans High School. He had a fundraiser coming up, new computers for the library. I wrote a check for $1,500, but not in my name. I signed it in Grace's. When the coordinator asked why, I just said, "Because she deserves to see her name on something unbroken." That evening, when she opened the thank you email from the school, her eyes filled. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I did," I said. "Every ledger needs a credit line." Daniel didn't call. He didn't show. He didn't fight. His silence was his resignation more than the letter had been. He'd burned his bridges, and now he was wandering in the smoke. But even silence leaves a paper trail. Claire forwarded me the civil docket entry. Respondent failed to respond to complaint. Default motion pending. I logged it, date stamped, February 9th. Respondent fails to respond, default in process. Leah visited on a Sunday afternoon with fresh numbers in a neat folder. The balloon note, she said, officially defaulted on January 31st. Bank repossession clock is ticking. I thought of Daniel staring at the screen, realizing he'd lost not just his job, his marriage, his freedom, but also the very asset he thought he was saving. Sometimes, Leah said softly, the numbers do the punishing for you. I wrote it down because she was right. That night, I opened the binder one last time before bed and added the final lines under Act 11, LEDGR. February 2nd, 9. Daniel's resignation tendered 2 halves, 4:43 p.m. CRC intake stamp. Grace Sipp's separation papers filed, notarized. $1,500 donation made to Evans School in Grace's name. Respondent failed to respond to civil complaint. Default motion filed 2/9. Leah confirms balloon note default 131. Then, at the bottom of the page, I wrote, resignation is not an apology, but it is an ending, and endings, documented, carry their own kind of justice. I closed the binder, turned off the lamp, and for the first time I didn't feel like I was guarding a case. I felt like I was holding a legacy, not of betrayal, but of resilience. March in Charlotte is a strange month. Winter still clings to the mornings, but by afternoon the air smells faintly of thawing earth and wet magnolia buds. On March 8th, I sat by my office window, ledger closed on the shelf, watching the season wrestle with itself the way people do when they're caught between endings and beginnings. That morning, a story broke on a local news site. Synthetic media threats, the new face of extortion. No names, no photos, no Carter family scandal. Just a sober piece on deepfakes. Their dangers, the laws catching up too slowly. A reporter had clearly gotten wind of our case through public filings but chose discretion. My family's name wasn't currency today. For that I silently thanked whatever editors still believed privacy outweighed clicks. I clipped the article, slid it into the back of the binder, and wrote the date, March 8th. Local press coverage, anonymized. Not proof of crime, not proof of betrayal, proof that even stories rot into statistics eventually. That evening, Grace came by. She'd moved into a small apartment across town, modest, quiet, hers. She carried 2 grocery bags and wore that look I hadn't seen in months. Relief that no one was tracking her movements, demanding her silence or shouting behind closed doors. I made chili, she said, laughing at herself. And it didn't set burn. We ate together at my kitchen table, Evan joining us, telling stories about his school debate team. For a moment it was just family. Again, not fractured, not afraid, just 3 voices mixing over bowls of chili. When Grace left that night, she hugged me longer than usual. You saved me, Dad, she whispered. I shook my head. No. You saved yourself. I just kept the paper trail clear enough for you to walk out. Her smile trembled, but it stayed. 2 weeks later, I pulled the ledger down one last time. I flipped through the pages slowly, the first entry on November 10th, the router logs, Harris's artifacts, Leia's spreadsheets, Ortiz's whispers, Claire's filings, the courtroom orders, the resignation letter, the civil default. Every line was a bruise turned into record. Every tab was a scar turned into judgment. I stopped at the last page, blank except for today's date. For a long time I just held the pen above the paper, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the wall clock, the ordinary sounds that had once been drowned out by threats and lies. Finally I wrote, You didn't lose me. You gave me away. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even closure. It was recognition. Daniel hadn't stolen me from my family. He'd handed me back to them by exposing himself. His loss had become our return. That night, I cracked the window in my bedroom. The March air drifted in, cool, carrying the faint scent of rain on asphalt. It didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt clean. Evan tapped on the doorframe, leaning in. Night, Dad. Night, son, I said. And when the lights went out, I realized revenge hadn't been about destroying Daniel. It had been about restoring us. Because at 52, I finally understood. Justice isn't fire. Justice is air. It clears the smoke. And when the smoke clears, you see who's still standing with you,